everyone to Women Dismantling Racism. To dismantle something means to take something apart or to take something down. Dismantle is a verb. It's an action word. It says do something. Today we're here because the senseless, horrific deaths of so many Black people at the hands of white men calls for us to do something. The absence of Trayvon Martin, Ahmaud Arbery, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, Eric Gardner, and George Floyd, coupled with hundreds of years of bad, horrible treatment and hopelessness, calls for us to do something. We're here because racism is dismantleable. Today, this conversation begins our journey to being dismantlers. I am Mischa Duffie. I have had the pleasure of being a human service professional for the last 32 years in Baltimore primarily, and just have had an opportunity to work all over the country with a lot of amazing people doing some great work, all about helping us to be the best human beings that we can be. And also an accountability coach. I am a mother, and I'm also the friend to Marcia Hart, who's co-hosting with me today. Well, we're co-hosting with each other. Our goal today is really to create a safe space for us to have a say, to share how we're feeling, and hopefully to leave with some action steps so that we can be better, so that we can feel more empowered to do something about what's going on in the world right now. And on that note, I'm going to pass it on to Marcia, to my co-facilitator.
Thanks, Mischa. Well, I mean, I'm pretty happy to have you as my friend, and I can't really rise to the level of all that you have done year after year. But our friendship is kind of a special one for me because it was formed in the aftermath of Baltimore's version of the George Floyd moment. That's came right after Freddie Gray in 2016 in the spring. Baltimore hosted an event called Light City, and I was pretty frustrated and upset and felt complicit and just felt like I needed to take some real action and not just think about how unjust the world is. So I decided to just go to the Light City event and make a point of meeting people, since I like to do that anyway. And I just had not previously made a point of meeting Black people because they're Black. So I decided to meet Black people because they're Black. And I went and I sat in the front, near the front row, and there was an attractive woman there. I thought maybe I could talk to her. And so I asked if I could sit down next to her, and she welcomed me, and we sat next to each other for the first day of this conference. And we chatted side by side about what was being said. And as I describe it, the side-by-side conversations can be very sort of surprisingly intimate. They're like walking together or riding in a car together or being in bed together. And you can say things that you might not otherwise say to someone face to face. And Mischa and I sort of immediately started doing that while we were critiquing and commenting on what was being said. And then the next day I came back and there was Mischa, and I asked if I could sit next to her, and she said, sure. And then after that, after the end of the conference, we decided to start meeting for coffee, and we met every week.
No. Can I just interrupt you?
You betcha.
This is important. Marcia said to me after the second day, when she came to sit next to me, she said, you know, she asked me what I thought about the conference. And then after that, she said, I want to be your friend. I'm standing there, little Black woman, have this white woman say to me, this was the first time this has ever happened to me. At that time, I was maybe 48. And she said to me, I want to be your friend. Just really, really intentional. That just took me aback. So I didn't want to leave that out because that said something about you.
Well, I don't remember saying explicitly that, but I am known for trying to kind of cut to the chase.
Yes,
so I guess I did right there. And then so we had coffee every week for over a year, and we talked about racism, but we also talked about everything else. And we talked about our own lives and what we were dealing with. And we just really made friends. And Mischa was doing some wonderful work with Girls at CEOs Foundation that she had created, and many other social services groups. and I volunteered for some of those, but really I just appreciated the friendship with Mischa and the opportunity to get outside of my own universe, limited universe. And Mischa was willing to do that with me was a wonderful thing. And the way this whole event came about is, and I was, over the last couple of weeks, I've been kind of grumpy. I had a traumatic accident. I was just trying to get over all the residue of that. And I was extremely grumpy. And then we have this horrible racial incidents, or more evidence of what's already horrible. And everyone was feeling kind of out of sort. COVID, everyone's isolated. And Mischa texted me or called me she emailed me on Monday this week and said, call me. And we haven't talked for about a year. And I did immediately. It was so great to make this connection. And then she said, well, let's continue this conversation. And about a couple hours later, I got an email saying, or I got a call, what are you doing at 1 o'clock on Saturday? And I said, nothing, as usual. And that was it. And then next thing I know, 5 minutes later, I got this flyer in the mail, by email, and a Zoom link. And here we are today. Thanks everybody for coming. And the goal of this is, as Mischa said, and then she said, this should be all white women. I was thinking, what the fuck? All white women? This is this is about black and white. And then I thought more about it, and the issues for white women are very different from the issues for black women, and the issues that we have to transform ourselves are different from the issues that we face when we're trying to interact with others. And this is the first step, what we have to do or can do or might want to do within ourselves as white women in order to have the kind of meaningful relationships that I think we all seek if we're here at all in this little group with black women, with black people, and in general. So we're all mostly white women. We might have a couple black women on here because I wasn't going to reject anybody because of the color of their skin if they wanted to be in it. So let's just start with how everyone, you guys, this group is feeling. And Mischa has some words, and if you want to raise your hand, although I think we have too many people for me to see all on the screen, we kind of just want to get a feeling of how everyone's feeling. Let's go.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, in the spirit of really getting a gauge of how everybody's feeling, because we just don't have time to let everybody tell us right now, although you all will have an opportunity to speak. But in the spirit of kind of getting us going, I'm going to say a word, emotions, feelings, that describes emotions and feelings. And I'd like for you to raise your hand when the word that comes up expressing how you feel. You can certainly raise your hand more than one time. We good with that?
You can also unmute yourself and just say, yeah, if you're feeling it.
Hi, Lynn.
Hello, Mischa.
Okay, here we go. Here are the words. Angry.
Yes.
Hopeful. Okay. Ready. Ready for some change. Exhausted. I'm exhausted. Empowered. Anybody feeling empowered? Amen. I'm sad.
Yes.
Okay. How about scared? Anybody feeling scared?
Yes.
Okay. What about stable? Anybody feeling like stable, like you got it? Okay. Powerless. Who's feeling powerless? Anybody feeling powerless? Okay. Shame. Anybody feeling shame? Okay. All right. Guilt. Anybody feeling guilt? Okay. Embarrassed. Anyone feeling embarrassed? Okay. Pessimistic. Okay. Powerful. Anybody feeling powerful? Okay. All righty. And vulnerable. Vulnerable. Last one. Anyone feeling like you are a contributor or have been a contributor to racism? Amen. Okay. Okay. First of all, thank you for your honesty. Second of all, I want to say this. I just want to give us a little, and for those of you who are already aware of anything that I'm about to say, don't feel like, oh, why is she telling me that? Because as a presenter, I've learned that everybody doesn't know the same thing. So this is about Blackness and my experience with all of this. And I just want to give us a little bit of background, because when we talk about how did we get here, when we talk about why Black people are so angry and so frustrated and exhausted, this is what we're talking about. 401 years ago, in 1619, the first African slaves were brought to North America, arriving in a colony in Virginia. Black people were, without warning, stripped from homes and brought to a foreign land where they were made slaves. Once on a strange soil, they were separated from their families, stripped of their clothes, forbidden to use language, forbidden to learn, indoctrinated by a false religious ideology, and placed under control of people who convinced them they were nothing. Subsequently, we were chained, beaten, hanged, humiliated, raped, and ultimately robbed of our identity and opportunity to a decent quality of life. Since then, Nicole Jones, who is the New York Times investigative reporter and a Pulitzer Prize winner, who's responsible for the landmark Project 1969, has also done a podcast to really speak to what happened from 1969 to all of these years later. She does an extensive and very comprehensive look at slavery and the dehumanization of Black people down through the years. Nicole Hannon Jones is her name. If you don't know her, you should get to know her. And more importantly, you should get to know the Project of 1619. Fast forward to the Tulsa Massacre of 1921. 99 years ago on May the 31st and June the 1st, groups of white people came into a Black business district and destroyed over 800 Black businesses. They killed over 300 and something Black people. Black people were minding their business, building wealth in what was called the Black Wall Street, and in came a group of white people to do so much destruction just because they could. The Tulsa Massacre is known as the most heinous and single worst incident of racial violence in American history. Fast forward some more years, we get to 2012. A lot happened in between there, but for the sake of time, 2012, we have Trayvon Martin being killed by George Zimmerman for nothing. 2015 in Baltimore, we had Freddie Gray being killed by police in a paddy wagon for nothing. 2015, we also had Sandra Bland killed for nothing. We had in 2017, Eric Gardner being killed for nothing. And one of the reasons the George Floyd killing resonates so much with people is because we heard him say the same thing we heard Eric Gardner say on the streets of New York when he said, "I can't breathe." And in each of those instances, those police officers were given an opportunity to let a Black man live, and they chose not to, right? So we're tired as Black people because it's not our job to end racism. We didn't start it, and it's not our job to end it, right? This conversation, again, is not about blame and guilt. So I hope when you leave the conversation, you don't feel as guilty or you don't feel as shameful, because nobody is suggesting that you, a white woman, did this, right? But it is important for you to understand the role that you can play in undoing it. Also want to say that Black people are exhausted because part of the reason, because we are disproportionately underrepresented in every good category, meaning employment, housing, political offices, and disproportionately overrepresented in every bad category, meaning health and poverty and senseless killings and discrimination. Every day we have to see Black people treated differently, right? I am the mother of 2 Black sons. My sons are 32 and 35. This is personal for me because I can't see George Floyd on the ground in Minneapolis calling for his mother and not think about my own son. I cried every day last week, not because my sons were on the ground, but because there was a Black man who looked just like them, right? And so what we want is, we just want people to get out of the way. If you're not going to be helpful, we just need people to get out of the way. Black people aren't looking for handouts, right? We don't want pity. We just want the opportunity to fully be everything that we know God created us to be. And that takes all of us.
So that's, Mischa, that's why we're having this little group.
That's why we're
so
having
that we can talk about that.
Yeah.
The actual steps that those of us who really do want to see things change
Absolutely.
can take. And for a lot of us, or as a strategy, like the fundamental strategy is empathy. It's the password.
Yeah.
You know, you can't work with somebody if you don't see them as a person. So while this first step towards genocide and oppression is dehumanization, the first step to dismantling it is humanization.
Amen.
And the way to humanize another person is essentially to be with them and to look at them. And we've been so conditioned not to actually look at people, and that there's this discomfort of looking at someone and not really knowing what that gaze means, what that attention. I'm going to give my attention to someone. They may not want it. I might be rejected. I don't know what they're thinking. If I look at Kimberly Hoover across a room in a meeting, I kind of sort of feel like I might know what she's thinking. If I look at Mischa, I might not know unless we're already friends. So I need to make more friends like Mischa so that I know more of the people in the room are thinking when I look at them, and that I'm going to also go to the trouble to make eye contact. Did you want to say more, Mischa, about your, the Black experience that you really want us to feel?
No, I think the empathy part and just doing something, and we're going to get into more of the action steps, but just as a Black woman, it's just really important that I say to you, when you hear people say enough is enough, they're not just talking about George Floyd. We're talking about 401 years of mistreatment, of oppression. And so the context I want you to have is bigger than just this moment, bigger than 2020. And just think about your own self and how you would feel. When Marcia talks about empathy, just think about how you would feel if you or people you were connected to had to continuously go through the threats of mistreatment and discrimination for no reason. I'll say this, and then Marcia, you can move forward with empathy. When you think about Aubrey just going on a jog, when you think about the gentleman in New York in Central Park just wanting to bird watch, something he's been doing forever, and he just says to a woman the same thing the sign in the park says, "Can you please put your dog on a leash?" And on video, she calls the police and says, "This man is threatening me." And she says, "I'm going to tell a lie," which is what often happens. And she tells the lie on video, right? You think about Black men being called, the police being called on Black men just because they're sitting in a neighborhood that doesn't think they should be there, or they buy a house and they're going home, they're driving home in a district that people don't think they should be there, but they've earned the right to be there because they've worked hard, right? Those kinds of things are just unimaginable, but they happen every single day. And unless you have experienced them on the level that Black men and even Black women have, it's hard to really wrap your mind around it. So I just want to be a voice today to say, think more than this about just this moment, but just look at the bigger picture of what's going on and why it really is time for things to be different.
I want to ask a general question about, and this is sort of on how you're feeling, is how many people have ever felt scared of a Black man on the street? walking down the street in wherever city you are, have you ever felt differently scared because the man is black? I mean, I've been scared of men in
Marcia,
general sometimes.
you could say that about almost any man. I mean,
Yeah, but let's focus on the black man, and the black. And I agree, Kenny, that yeah, and yes, and all these things that we're talking about, I think that we as white women have the experience of discrimination and oppression by men under white male supremacy and patriarchy. So we're not alien to the idea of restricted opportunity, indignities, powerlessness. We're familiar with that. What we're trying to do here is find ways that we specifically can help change ourselves so that our ability to interact successfully in support of an anti-racist agenda, in support of Black people. How can we do that most effectively?
And see, Marcia, to your point, one of the reasons it wasn't important to have Black women on here other than myself to co-facilitate with Marcia is because Black women already get it, right? They already get what needs to happen. They are as exhausted as I am. So as a Black woman, I don't need to be telling another Black woman, you need to do better and you need to treat Black men better, right? Or you need to be a part of the solution, because every Black woman I know is already a part of the solution or trying to be.
We have different issues.
We wanted to empower white women in particular to say, here's some things you can do now. I had heard so many white women say, I feel powerless and helpless, and you are not. You are not. So that's what this call, that's why it was more important to have white women on the call than Black women, because you're not.
For this particular agenda.
Right. Right.
And the content here is basically about how to make a friend of someone who's not in your group, and it's strangely enough a major challenge. It's uncomfortable to meet somebody from whom you want something that you might not feel entitled to ask for. I want to ask for a friendship from Mischa. What is she going to get out of that? Nothing. Friendship with Marcia Hart. What good is that? I can't really say how valuable.
I wouldn't say it's been nothing. It's been a blessing, absolutely.
But you wouldn't know that when you first met me.
No, absolutely not.
And I really wouldn't know when I first met you whether it would be sort of worth my time. And that goes to another part of this this empathy content, is that there has to be a self-interest. And so that anyone would be willing to spend an hour on a beautiful day like today is already a representation of a commitment. Then what can you do with it? What's the benefit to you? What's the benefit to us, white women, of making friends with Black women or Black men? And I want to just refer to an essay in The Atlantic from 2012 by who wrote this? This is Coates, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote this. It was about Breitbart, when Breitbart wrote, to kind of smeared Shirley Sherrod, who was the Georgia agriculture something or other, who was smeared as a anti-white racist and lost her job. I don't know if you remember that case. And Breitbart wrote about it in a way that perpetuated the smear. And I wanted to read to you the sentence of how it is in our own interest to look more deeply and make those real connections with people other than ourselves. By embracing the deception, by neglecting to research Sherrod before putting up a clip of her talking, by electing to see her as little more than a shiv against the hated liberals, he deprived himself of knowledge, of experience, of insight, of enlightenment, that he might learn something from Sherrod, that he might access some power from her life and pass that on to loved ones and friends, never occurred to him. And I think that's where
Coach said that, right?
Coates wrote that in an essay called "On Making Yourself Right," that was published in March 2012 in the aftermath of that smearing of Shirley Sherrod. And that was a really, I thought, spoke directly to what I was thinking when I thought, you know, I kind of really need to make some friends with Black people because I have a lot to gain from that. And my exposure to the idea of empathy. I mean, I remember the moment I discovered empathy. I was 36 years old, and it was in Hooksett, New Hampshire, and it was a snowstorm. I was having a miserable time in my life. I just wasn't really hitting my stride very well, and I was felt so beaten down that I was willing to have a conversation, basically for the first time in my life, with a gas station cashier. And she was so nice, and she just made me feel so human. And I realized, oh my gosh, all these people the whole time, they've been human, and I haven't really been. And that opened my eyes to the burden that I had given myself of trying to be a little bit distant or superior to a lot of other people. As a privileged, overeducated white woman without a lot of financial problems beating down on me every day, it's easy to separate yourself. It's easy to say I'm different than, they have different issues. It's easy to say I'm better than, but the loss to me is much greater than the loss to them of not being connected.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would certainly agree with that. I think that the value in human connection, period, is something that we all miss when we stay within our silos and in our bubbles and really not venture out, because every friendship I have or opportunity I have to meet somebody who doesn't look like me gives me an opportunity to learn more about them, and it gives them an opportunity to learn more about me. And in learning about each other, as you just said, we all are we all have our own sense of agency. We all are institutions unto ourselves. We have life, and we have lives that we've lived and experiences that we've had. And until we have conversations or do what Marcia and I did, Marcia didn't say this specifically, but we made the decision, Marcia and I, to every Thursday for a year at 8:30 in the morning, meet for an hour. We chose a different coffee house in Baltimore, and every Thursday at 8:30, even if we had to change, from 8:30 to 9 or whatever, we just made it our decision. We committed. We disciplined ourselves and made the commitment for 1 year to spend an hour together every Thursday.
It was wonderful. It was a great thing.
Yeah.
So the things that we, and then we're going to open this up in a second, because we can bore you guys, we can even bore each other talking on and on. But the things that I recognized was necessary to build a new friendship. Time was the first one. I needed to be willing to make the time, and that can be, in order to make the time, you got to have sufficient level of curiosity, and I think you have to have a sufficient level of self-interest. And understanding the nuances of self-interest is part of what I'm very curious about exploring with this group. We are all self-interested in trying to make ourselves better, have better connections, and the world better. But I'm also really interested, Kenny, I'm sorry I cut you off about the man thing. Kenny, do you want to say more things? Does anybody want to add to this? We can open this up. We've got 20-something people, 24 people, so we don't have too many people to be able to actually have a conversation. And I think you can just unmute yourself, and if you want to interrupt somebody, figure out how to do that on Zoom.
And do it kindly. And let's remember, just in the interest of time, and because we do have 24 people, can you just kind of keep your comments to like 1 or 2 minutes, because all of you are valuable to us. And as Marcia said, because you've taken the time to be here today, we want to hear from as many of you as want to be heard from. You don't have to feel pressure to talk, but if you'd like to, that's why we've created this opportunity. So as Marcia said, unmute yourself and go, and just remember that there are other people who want to talk as well.
I'll start. I want to ask this question, Mischa. What do you think is the best way for us to keep the momentum going from these incidents and actually start accomplishing some, what I'll characterize as dramatic change?
Absolutely. So we have the place of solutions and action steps. I'm going to give you that answer when we get there, right? So I'm going to remember, I mean, I don't have to remember, but we have the action steps of what we do from here, and I'll answer that then, okay?
You don't want to just say what some of those are? Like, well, what's the first, like, what's the least we can do, or the best thing that we can do? The most accessible thing we can do.
You said the most what?
Accessible.
One is just acknowledging people. Stop making Black people invisible when you see them. I mean, we should acknowledge each other, period. But there is something to be said about how America seeks to make Black people invisible. If you see a Black person, just say hi. Stop. Go ahead.
That is very powerful.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful.
Stop clutching your purse when you see a Black man walking toward you, or stop crossing the street just because as a Black woman, I'm walking toward you and you don't want to speak to me. If I hold the door open for you and you're coming in the store, or someone does, say thank you. You know, the momentum can continue. You see people hugging each other in these protests and the things that we see all over the world. We see police officers hugging Black people. That matters, not because we think we're less than and we don't think we deserve a hug, but for the most part, as a social worker, what I know is everybody wants to be seen, heard, and validated. Seen, heard, and validated in big ways and in small ways. And so just acknowledging us, you know, not going up to me and saying, oh, Mischa, I see you. Oh, and by the way, please stop saying I don't see color. You are not doing us a favor. Ladies, when you say, I see you, but I don't see color, listen, I'm a beautiful Black woman. I want you to see me. Just like you are a beautiful white woman, I see you, I see your white skin. There's nothing wrong with us seeing the color of each other's skin. It's just being able, as Marcia said, to treat each other decently and with love. So the first thing I would say is just stop making us invisible. Next
May I
person.
say something?
Yes.
You know, I have been writing about this issue since I was 24 and I'm now 60.
Wow.
But I don't want to like give my resume because that's colossally boring. But I will say that in 2008, I moved to Harlem. And of course, I could have seen myself as a gentrifier because I was one. But one of the things that I learned was how to be schooled by people who were, you know, old heads. And one of the first things that they taught me when I came out of my house is, you know, I would walk by and like any white person in the world, I never said shit to anybody. And these ladies would be sitting on the corner and they would be, you know, having their conversation. They'd say, who raised you? Do you not know how to say hello? Do you not know how to greet someone? And that is something that was one of the first things in Harlem that I learned. And you would be surprised how many friends I eventually made and now everywhere I go in Harlem, if someone is coming towards me, I always say, hey, how you doing?
Amen.
Sometimes people say nothing to me and they look at me like, what? And isn't it a beautiful day? Oh my God, I like your perfume. And before I know it, we're talking. So I just want to say it does work.
Amen. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I do. I thank you for that also. And I want to go back to Mischa's original point about just saying hi. And I think we cannot underestimate the power of microaggressions.
Yes.
And what Mischa is talking about is the opposite of a microaggression. And that counteracts all those teeny tiny things that that happens to all of us all the time when you're oppressed for whatever reason. So, touche.
Amen.
Thanks, Pam.
Anybody else have something to share? Lynn, I am calling you. You raised your hand that you felt powerless. Did you want to talk a little bit about why?
Sure. You know, we are all aware that this has been going on for a long time. And I think, and we've all been ashamed of it and saddened by it. I say collectively, we white women, most of those I assume who are on this call. And we haven't figured out what to do about it. And we've worked in, I particularly, bastions of maleness, bastions of whiteness. It's really, really hard to change that, even internally. I have not really been active in the political process until this last presidential election. And so I am starting to pay, I've always been a voter, but I pay more attention to how you can affect real change. But I think it's really hard in this moment. I sign petitions, I do all of that, but it's hard in this moment to see how to affect the big change. And the small steps, I think I've taken many of those, but I think it's really hard in this moment to see how to affect big change. And I also fear that this moment, like so many others, will pass us by when the next news cycle comes. And I am afraid and shameful for that. And obviously we'll try and keep moving it forward. But I think that is
Lynn, I
why.
have very, very much I share your position almost entirely. And I am not politically active. I haven't been politically active, but I've tried to recognize my personal power on a personal level. So while I am concerned about the big picture and the political policy change and how to affect that, I hope that we have a better chance of doing that by making the connections across all these victim groups. I've been very upset for the last long time about the fragmentation of the oppressed. And I think that's been a strategy of white male supremacy that's been really effective. So we have anti-Black racism, and then we have anti-immigrant racism, and then we have homophobia, and then we have sexism. Well, basically we have one problem. And until all of us have the opportunity or take the opportunity or make the opportunity to connect across all of these victim groups, I don't think we have a prayer of changing policy. So I see that at a very personal level, the most important step is to get across is to dismantle the fragmentation. And that to do that, I think we need to make empathetic connections with each other.
I would agree with that.
There's one point that I wanted to make earlier that I forgot to make, that is about what Carol Gilligan has to say about empathy. And this is, and people who were at my 60th birthday party will recognize this, because it's so powerful to me that when I gave my 60th birthday remarks, I included it in them. And I always thought that treating others poorly was a way to gain immediate or short-term advantage. And then I realized that it was actually part of a deeper strategy to make long-term oppression possible by isolating the oppressor, not the oppressed, but by isolating the oppressor emotionally, by giving them practice in distancing themselves from their own natural empathy. And it makes it possible to be the oppressor by oppressing others. It's practice. And the way Carol Gilligan says it succinctly is, if you want to elevate one group of people over another, you have to undercut our relational capacities as human beings. You have to stop the person at the top from feeling empathy for the people at the bottom. When we make empathetic connections with others across all groups, we break down the infrastructure of white male supremacy.
Maybe I could say something here too about the idea of making the big change and affecting the big change. Is what I've come to understand that is, it's just a massively arrogant way of looking at the world. And I know, because I'm massively arrogant and will continue to be so, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I really do think that there is no single thing anybody can do, or any single group that can affect the big change. The big change comes from what Marcia and Mischa are talking about, which are long-term, hard-fought, small steps that will be, I mean, you can be as hopeless in any moment that you want to be in, but you cannot be hopeless in your entirety. And that's about the only way I get through.
Anybody else had any other comments?
I have one more comment, and then other people might have another comment, but there's just one more thing I want to say about the social connection. And this comes from a very recent essay by Masha Gessen in the New Yorker. And she's writing about Hannah Arendt and about fascism and about totalitarianism, but she's really writing about isolation. And the article is called "The Political Consequences of Loneliness and Isolation During a Pandemic." The quote that I pulled out of here that I think is relevant for us in this conversation is, "Isolation is the inability to act together with others, which is the source of a person's political power. Isolation renders people impotent." So if you're feeling powerless, the way to transform that feeling is by putting yourself in the position to be able to act with others, by de-isolating yourself and making our connections across the fragmented victim groups, to me, is the best way to act politically.
So if there are no more comments, we want to go to some solutions and then action steps. Any other comments? Again, we want to create a space for you all to share how you feel.
Hi, Mischa.
Hi.
Okay. So I guess just what I would like to add to that, and part of it is feeling helpless. And so as Mischa knows, she was very much my personal mentor when I started this organization about 6 years ago. The purpose, one of the main goals of the organization is to bring people together who don't naturally connect.
Can you say what your organization is, Leslie?
Oh, sorry. It's called Mentorprise. We're in DC. We serve, so what we do is we recruit mentors for 15 different mentoring programs that serve all disadvantaged youth and young adults. So our main goal is to get people in the community. Well, I guess our mission has many purposes, but one of the things that got me really excited about it and wanting to create it was the idea of bringing people together who don't naturally connect. So we go into companies and we go to fairs and anywhere people will listen to us speak, and we try to convince people to become mentors of disadvantaged youth, which are often in these populations, right? These are the minorities. These are socially. So what, it's been a great work, and it's been really rewarding because the people who do it really feel change in their life. And I think that they view people in a very different light than they may have before they started, because they are, they're walking in their shoes. They're really learning to understand the issues that these young children or young adults are having to face. But what I have found through the last several years of doing this is a frustration. It's really hard to get people to get off their couch. They'd much rather do something for a day. They much rather make a donation. They much rather do the things that are easy, get food together. All of these things are super important. I'm not saying that they are not super important, and I participate in those as well. But I think making that connection with somebody that looks different, whose life is different, is really what I think is the most impactful, both to the person being mentored and, of course, to the to the mentor. So I feel a little bit rejuvenated at the moment and ready to sort of get out there again, because it just seems more critical than ever for people to start having these conversations. But I do feel frustrated because I feel that people rather do the easy thing. And when we get back to, like, you can go out and participate in a protest, part of me feels guilty for not doing it. My girls are down there doing it. I'm afraid with COVID. But at the end of the day, it's going to take more than that. right? What are our goals? I keep telling to my girls, like, this is great and I'm glad everyone is pumped and ready to go, but what are the outcomes we're trying to create here? And how are we going to get there?
I think that the willingness to put in the time is the foundation of it. Money is one thing, time is another. Money, you can always get more if you can, and time you can't. So people are stingy, even stingier about their time. So that's why I emphasize over and over and over the self-interest. And you mention it, the benefits to the mentors are tremendous. And the benefits to me of making a friendship with Mischa are tremendous. And the benefits to me of not having to carry the burden of being superior is tremendous.
Wow, I love that. I think that is so powerful, not having to carry the burden of being superior. The reason that's so powerful is because none of us are better than the next person. If we could just get that, like, I'm no better than you and you're no better than me, at the same time, we're amazing, and we're more amazing together as human beings than we are isolated and separate and apart, right? I'm going to go into some solutions. Is that okay, Marcia? We go with solutions? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Grab some pen and paper if you can, so you can write some of these down.
Are we going to send these out? Are we going to send these?
Send them out for anybody that doesn't have a pen and paper.
We'll send them out to everybody.
So for the young lady that asked about, what to do to keep the momentum and how we can keep getting better. First thing we want to say is acknowledge where you've been complicit and culpable. You don't have to tell anybody. That's an inside conversation. Sit with yourself, be reflective. The reason that's important is because Dr. Lawrence Brown, who's an associate professor in the School of Community Health and Policy at Morgan, said, if you are not in the process of undoing racism, you are maintaining the racism that was done. If you're not in the process of undoing racism, you're maintaining the racism that was already done. He goes on to say, and if it was done, it can be undone, thus the reason for dismantling it. The other thing is, if you were, ask yourself why. Why were you complicit? Why were you culpable? Why did you see yourself as supreme over Black people? Once you figure that out, forgive yourself. Turn the page. Start over. Be intentional about doing better. What does that mean? Be more loving. Be more kind. Stop judging people and making assumptions. Just because you see Black people in disadvantaged situations or in disadvantaged communities does not mean they deserve to be there. You don't know their story. Just know more than I do when I see a homeless white man. I don't need to make a judgment about him, right? Because it's none of my business how he got there. It just matters if I could do something to help him get to where he needs to go, we can start from there. Also, from an organizational perspective, stop using buzzwords like diversity, inclusion, and equity, racial disparity, complicit bias, if you really are not doing the heavy lifting of what that stuff means to make changes. Someone said this earlier, have the hard conversation. I'd like to ask this question and get answered by show of hands. How many of you have had a conversation in your family, in your work group, or in your sister circles about racism? Okay, wonderful. Continue to have those conversations. If you haven't had them, ask yourself why and start to have them, because dismantling racism is a conversation that white people have to have with white people, right? Take action steps in terms of putting more skin in the game. I had Leslie down here as an example of mentoring. Read a book or something. Read more information on racism by Black people. If you can, get your hands on a copy of the 1619 Project. Personally, mentor a Black girl so that you can start to experience who we are. Adopt a Black family if you can. These are suggestions. You can go down the list and pick what makes sense. Make a commitment to donate annually or monthly to a Black organization that's doing great work. Volunteer. at a Black organization that's doing great work. If you have a company, hire qualified Black people. Hire Black people who want to do something with their life. Restructure your organizations, departments, or teams. Ladies, listen. If you work for an organization and only people around you are white people, that's a problem. You need to ask yourself and ask the people that you work with, why are we the only ones here? If you're on a board or you work in an environment where there are no Black people, question that. If you own property and you can rent to Black people, rent to them. Do the credit check. Make sure that they're qualified and that they're honorable, but don't be discriminatory in your renting practices. Author, co-author, support legislation that calls for that calls for change in policies, programs, and protocol. Use your gifts. So online the other day, I was telling Marcia this. I was so annoyed on Twitter. There's a young lady. She tweeted, white young lady, I can't do anything about racism, but I'm a writer. And if you're a writer as a Black person, you can send me your movie script and I'll read it. That made me angry. There was another guy on Instagram. He's an entrepreneur. And he says, he does these master classes, and he says only 2% of the people who participate in my master classes are Black because they probably can't afford them. I'm gonna let a certain amount of whoever DMs me first, Black people in first. Again, we don't need handouts. We don't need pity, right? If you are a writer, write an op-ed about how you feel. If you're a filmmaker, make a movie or a documentary about what you see. If you're Leslie, like Leslie's group, it was a group of 4 or 5 white women. And they called me and asked me if I would help them get their mentoring program started. I felt their hearts and their desire to want to do something to make things better. It made it very easy for me to show up to help them. I really need you all to not think that you don't have the power to do something, because you do. You don't have to be Martin Luther King. You don't have to be Oprah Winfrey. You don't have to be Nelson Mandela, but use the space that you occupy called life and do something. Do what I did to Marcia and Lynn. I called them and I said, listen, what are you all doing? We need to do something. Call people that you know, your white friends, and say, how can we do something to make the world a better place for Black people? And because here's the thing, the world is already a better place for white people. You don't have to do a whole lot to put white people in a position for life to be better. What can you do for the least of these? For those who are already feeling like George Floyd, that somebody has their knee on their neck and that they're having a hard time breathing. What can you do to make breathing easier in the life of the least of these? That's the question to ask yourself. And again, I'm not asking you to do anything big. Smile. We just talked about that. Saying hi, these kinds of things make a difference. And here's the last thing I want to say about solutions. The bottom line is, ladies, to make things equitable, white people, particularly white men, but also some white women, are going to have to be willing to give up some power. This is a hard ask. I get it, right? But that's what's going to have to happen. Or there's going to have to be a redistribution of power in such a way that Black people can get a fair shot at using their full essence without repercussions and without criticism. There is nothing we can't do as Black people if we're just given the opportunity, if the door is just open. You all know people who can hire Black people.
We just need to know, we need to introduce ourselves to enough Black people that we want to hire.
Black people on you can put them on your boards. You can make them a part of the work that you do, right? And again, I'm not saying, again, we don't need pity. I'm talking about people who are willing, who want to do this, right? Black people and white people alike. So I just, again, those are some of the thoughts that I have about what some solutions.
And I have some books and some podcasts that I'll put on there when we send the thing out. I listened to one, Brene Brown talking with Ibram Kendi about how to be an anti-racist. Really,
Oh,
really
wow.
good podcast.
That was powerful. That was.
It's really good. It's really easy to listen to. You're going to learn something, and you're going to enjoy it. And there's a couple other ones too that I've listened to recently.
All right.
I have a question, Mischa. Do you think there's an extent to which white people need to step aside in some situations in leadership? If you're in a leadership position, should you actively look for an opportunity to step aside so that you can create a space?
I don't think you need to step aside. I think if your organization is top heavy with just white people, and you know that there are opportunities for Black people to be include them, right? It's not about you stepping aside, because again, it takes all of us. That's why all of us are on this conversation. And as we look at the diversity in the protest, we're happy that people of all nationalities are protesting on behalf of George Floyd. So it's not about stepping aside. It's about making more room. You know, that's all.
Yeah.
Just make more room.
Make a bigger pie.
Yeah, just make more room. Yeah. And you have to have the courage, you know, Kimberly, to say to those people at your organization, we need to do better. And I know that these things are not easy. The things that I'm saying, they're not easy. But if enough of you come together at your organization and have these conversations, change can happen. A couple of years ago, it was reported that there were some lower management people or lower staff at Amazon who sent emails to upper management asking them to include more Black people on the board and in leadership positions. And Amazon voted as a board, no, absolutely not.
Whoa.
You can research it, you can Google it. They wouldn't do it, right? That's racism, right? So when you have opportunity to include us, to help us, and you absolutely say no just because you can, that's racism. Stop doing that. Stop letting people around you do that. If you're out with somebody and they're acting inappropriately towards somebody of another color just because they can't, check them. Say something. I'm not saying you can change them, but just say something. Our silence speaks volumes. You know, it speaks volumes. And again, I know it's hard to step up and say the things that need to be said, but I promise you, you will feel so much better. You will sleep better at night. You won't feel as burdened or as shameful because you know you're doing the work. This was easy for me today because, hey, I love people. Anybody who knows me know that I love people. And I'm going to show up to help whomever I can, whenever I can. So that's all we're asking.
No, we are very, very happy to have you, Mischa, help us go through some of these subject matter. But I also think that the issue is white, it's not Black. Yeah, we're white, absolutely. and our barriers are internal. We've been trained to think we're superior. We've been trained to carry that load. And some of us are just as sick and tired of it as you are. But it's also 2:00. And I'm kind of the time management person.
Okay. So it's on you, Marcia. You're gonna do your piece on friends.
Oh, how to make friends. Yes. Oh well, we don't even have time on the how to make friends.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah, that it really is just to make the time, the commitment, and have self-interest, and be willing to recognize that your self-interest is the driver, and you can't do it for somebody else. You're doing it for you. So go make friends. Do it for you.
Can I say this last thing? Remember that when we talk about racial equity, it means changing systems, policy. I said that a minute ago, policies, protocol, but it also means changing your mindset and your behavior. You know, mindset, as Marcia just said, is a big deal. For so many white people, racism is ingrained. You know, people have been taught to hate Black people. People have been taught that Black people are nothing and we don't deserve the same opportunities that white people have. That's a lie. You have to dismantle the lie in your mind first, and then your behavior can subsequently follow. But I would encourage you all to stop hiding behind excuses, Stop hiding behind thinking you aren't good enough and meaning you can't do enough because you don't have a big platform. Use what you have. Start where you are with the people that you love, that you're with regularly, and start making the difference that you can make right there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
I really appreciate that
Really
all
wonderful.
of you showed up. Really
Yeah,
great.
thank you all for showing up. And Lauren, thank you. We're grateful. We're grateful for this opportunity. We're going to send out some next steps stuff and some updates to summarizing this in the email to everyone. And you'll have my email. You have Marcia's email. If there are any other questions I can answer offline, don't hesitate to reach out. It's been a blessing to have you all on today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you
Thank
guys
you.
so much.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank
Bye.
you.
All right. Bye-bye.